Welcome back to County Talk. After an event like Hurricane Irma, organizations have the opportunity to assess their performance and identify areas where they can improve. Sarasota County is fortunate to have many partnerships, and in the days following the storm, we connected with two of our community partners, the Barancik Foundation and the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, who offered to assist us in a review of the county response. Their generous support helped bring former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate on board to guide us through this process. Craig, it's been an excellent opportunity for us to collaborate with you on the after-action review. For those who may not be familiar with what an after-action review process is, can you explain it a little bit?
Well, whenever you have a major event, there are things that you did well you want to capture. There were challenges you hadn't had before you needed to look at that. And it gives you a chance to really say, if this happens again, what are we going to do differently? And those lessons learned need to be applied. So that's really the whole purpose here, is to look back at the event and go, what are we going to do differently next time? And what did we do that we want to make sure we do next time as well, and capture all of that.
Looking at our after-action review, do all counties or municipalities do an AAR, as we call it, in the manner that we've pursued?
Not usually. It is something that you would like to see happen more frequently. I think what we saw after Irma was individual agencies did that. But none of the counties that I'm aware of involved the community, not just the municipalities, but a lot of the other organizations, into a formal review of the entire response. That is something you would like to see. Unfortunately, here in Sarasota, with the leadership of the County Manager's Office and the Board of County Commissioners, that has happened.
You know, Craig, we kicked off the AAR in mid-November 2017. Tell us about that initial meeting and talk us through the process a little bit, if you will.
Again, that first meeting was to really start capturing people's initial impressions of what happened, challenges, and things they would do differently. I mean, over 100 people from the individual cities and their leadership, from the manager's office, but also the responders, but groups like Red Cross and others that were part of that. And one of the stellar groups, the school board, who during all this really had to change what they were doing to meet the community's need, and said, we know next time there are things we want to do to make sure we're better accessible to the public. So I think it was that initial, we asked what were the things that went well and what would you do differently? And that was a great conversation to start what in many cases we kind of knew some areas we wanted to work on, but in other areas that kind of emerged from that kind of gave us some new ideas of how to approach this.
It's really interesting. Out of that meeting, we ended up through the month of December and into January, a total of 23 meetings with over 350 individuals across the community, their feedback. Ultimately, that all ended up in a very transparent process. And in February, we brought all of our elected officials in throughout the county, not just the county, but all of the municipalities, the school district, for a review meeting. And you were, of course, part of that along with our peer reviewers. What are your thoughts about that meeting and the feedback from our partners?
Well, I think we heard, in many cases, things that we're saying we want to do differently next time. A lot of buy-in from the elected leadership. And I think people really came away from that meeting was, we're just not talking about what happened. We're actually making progress on really looking at how we focus on our citizens and building our system around our citizen needs. And I think getting that leadership buy-in is a huge empowerment for the people that actually have to implement this, because they've heard from the elected leadership, this is a direction we want to go in.
And one of the other things that I think we did was our peer reviewers. You worked with Alan Harris, an emergency manager out of Seminole County, Jonathan Lord, who had worked with the state in now Flagler County, and Manny Soto from a city perspective with the city of Orlando. How did that process work with them as you were going through the review with them?
Well, I think it's always helpful to bring those perspectives. And I think what we found was our peer reviewers actually took a lot of things that we were talking about back home. So I think it shows how effective our process was. It wasn't our peer reviewers just coming in and say, I would do this, I would do that. They were going back and said, well, they were really excited about what you're doing here in Sarasota County to change, and they're taking that back home. So it's always good to bring in people from the outside to kind of make sure that, we are making sense to ourselves, we're making sense to our peers. They had some very good input into some of this, but I think the other part is they took a lot away from what Sarasota had learned to take back to their communities.
That's the feedback I've received from them as well. And I think as we look back at the entire after action process, what we all want to know is, what were the big findings of the AAR?
Well, the big findings was sheltering. It was the largest shelter operation ever in Sarasota County, over 20,000 people sheltered. And what we learned is we had built systems that were more designed to be easy to manage. Didn't always meet the needs of our citizens, such as having limited number of shelters that would be pet friendly, or opening shelters up in phases and then having to update that constantly throughout that. What we learned from that, and I think our recommendations kind of gelled around this, with really the leadership of the school board supporting this, is we need to go and make sure our shelters are safe and enhanced protective areas for hurricanes. We need to make sure they're accessible to all and that they're pet friendly, so that people don't have to go to a certain shelter because they have their pets. The closest available shelter is the one they can go to. I think we also looked on the evacuation side. We really need to move away from a generic term of special needs and really looking at who needs transportation assistance and who is medically dependent. And our goal here is increasingly to simplify this for the public and building the system around them and really focusing on those needs. And again, I have to come back to the school board and county leadership really committing to this idea that we want our shelters accessible and pet friendly so people can go to that closest, safest shelter when the evacuation orders are given.
I think we can unpack a lot of those recommendations in our next segment. So when we come back, we'll be joined by County Administrator Jonathan Lewis to discuss these topics in more depth and Sarasota County's program enhancements.